Cinderella, Jack, Gus, Cinderella's stepmother, Drizella, Fairy Godmother, Anastasia, the baker, Cinderella. "Come on, Gus, faster!" cries Jack as he scurries out from a hole in the wall in Cinderella's castle. Gus races behind him and demands to know what's the hurry. Jack explains, "Fairy Godmother's here." He's just heard that she's reading the Cinderella book out loud to everyone in the library. Jack is eager not to miss a bit of her story. But as Gus and Jack reach the library, they hear the Fairy Godmother read, "Cinderella and Prince lived happily ever after. The end." Gus and Jack are very sorry that they missed the story. Gus begs, "Aw, maybe you could read another one." The Fairy Godmother says, "I'm sorry, Gus, but that's the only Cinderella book there is." But Gus has a splendid idea. Maybe we could make another book." The other mice cheer. They agree that they could tell the stories and make the drawings as well. But Jack calls out, No, wait a minute. Who'd want to read a book made by mice?" The Fairy Godmother smiles. "Cinderella would read it, and if you made it, I know that she'd love it." The Fairy Godmother pulls out her magic wand and offers to help with a bibbidi-bobbidi-boo. When the Fairy Godmother waves her wand, a book cover and paper magically appear. Everyone gets busy making the book, with crayons of all colors and also some sparkly glitter and sticky glue. The mice and birds cut pages and decorate the cover. Some sew up the book with a thread and a hook. But suddenly, the Fairy Godmother looks at Gus and Jack and realizes, "Our pages are bare. We need a story from you." Then Gus has another glorious idea. "Yeah, remember when Anastasia fell in love?" The Fairy Godmother looks at Gus, surprised. "Anastasia? Cinderella's stepsister? That Anastasia?" Gus thinks it's a messy story, but Mary the Mouse disagrees. "No, it's a love story." So everyone gets busy to tell their story of an uncommon romance. Once upon a time, Cinderella's stepsisters, Anastasia and Drizella, fought over a silk scarf that they both said was theirs. "That's mine," claimed Drizella. "No, it's mine," insisted Anastasia. They tugged and tugged at the scarf till suddenly it tore with an almighty rip. Drizella tossed it back to Anastasia. "Oh, you're right. It is yours." Cinderella's stepmother came in and louder than both of them put together shouted, "Girls, girls, stop all this bickering at once. Cinderella's ball is tomorrow night, so pay attention," the stepmother said. Anastasia and Drizella stuck out their tongues at each other, but Cinderella's stepmother carried on anyway. "Every noble bachelor in the kingdom will be there. If you want to find a husband, you have to make the most of this opportunity." Cinderella's stepmother looked at her daughters very sternly and warned, "I won't let you fail me again. A perfect appearance is the only way to catch a proper gentleman. We shall find you men of wealth and nobility," the stepmother continued. Anastasia became excited. Maybe a count. Drizella aimed even higher, or a duke. Cinderella's stepmother nodded her head. Precisely. But in order to attract the right suitors, Anastasia and Drizella both needed new gowns, and new shoes, and jewelry. "The fancier, the better," cried Cinderella's stepmother. Meanwhile, Cinderella slipped out of the castle wearing an old dress with a scarf tied closely round her face. But Jack, Gus, and the Bluebirds recognized her immediately. "Morning, Cinderella." Cinderella quickly put her fingers to her lips to hush them. "I'm going to the market in disguise, so no one will recognize me." Cinderella wanted to surprise the prince with a garland of flowers. "Wanna come along?" She smiled at Jack and Gus. Cinderella lowered her basket and Jack and Gus hopped in. Anastasia had come with her mother and sister to the market square to shop for Cinderella's ball. Anastasia watched as the flower man sold flowers to a young couple. "Remember the tradition. Give these to each other at the ball and you'll always be together." The man spotted Anastasia. "Don't you need a garland of roses for the ball? Guaranteed to win you his heart." Anastasia was about to take the flowers when her mother noticed and screamed, "Anastasia, what are you doing?" Anastasia jerked her hand away and rushed after her mother. "Oh, nothing. Coming." As Anastasia passed the bakery, she accidentally bumped right into the baker. Their eyes met as he held out a basket of newly baked rolls. "Would you like one?" Cinderella, Gus, and Jack watched with surprise as Anastasia shyly took one. But all of a sudden, Cinderella's stepmother stormed in and knocked the roll out of Anastasia's hand. The stepmother turned up her nose and sneered, "I think not. Everything in this shop is inferior." Cinderella watched unnoticed as her stepmother dragged Anastasia out of the shop. She hissed into her daughter's ear, "You're not to say a word to that shopkeeper. I forbid it." Outside the bakery, Cinderella had other plans. She turned to Gus and Jack with a happy smile. "I know that look. I think they're in love," she explained. Jack looked at her, shocked. "Anastasia's in love? That's crazy, Cinderella." But Cinderella knew much better. "Oh, come on, you two. Anyone can fall in love." "Heh, anyone but Anastasia." "Maybe she just needs some help," Cinderella explained. Jack wasn't so sure. "Yeah, lots of help." Cinderella gently reminded him. "Well, I had a lot of help too, remember?" Jack and Gus certainly did, because they were the ones who helped her marry the prince. Cinderella started plotting. We have to figure out how to get them together again. "I know. We'll lure them into the square, and here's how we'll do it," whispered Cinderella. First, the clever bluebirds flew over the crowd in the market. Then they swooped and snatched Anastasia's ugly purple bonnet away. The birds dangled it just above her head so she couldn't reach it. Anastasia swatted the air and shrieked furiously. But it didn't help. "Out of my way," she yelled as she chased after the birds, shoving her way through the stalls and carts like a bull in a china shop. Next, Cinderella watched as Gus and Jack led the other mice from the castle into the bakery. Once inside, Jack, Gus, and the mice scurried onto the French breads and started making lots of noise to try to get the baker's attention. A few mice balanced baguettes on their noses. Others juggled rolls. Some even made a pyramid. But nothing worked. The baker still didn't notice them. That is, until Cinderella leaned around the door and gave a loud, piercing whistle. The baker whirled around and saw Jack, Gus, and their furry friends and screamed, "Mice! In my baguettes!" The baker chased the mice out of his shop before anyone could see that they were there. Mice would ruin his business. Out in the plaza, Anastasia was chasing the birds. They dropped her bonnet smack in front of the baker's shop. Anastasia picked it up and slammed it on her head with a loud humph. Anastasia turned, ready to storm off, when she ran straight into the baker. But just as Anastasia and the baker were about to speak, Gus dashed between the legs of a horse who was spooked. "Winnie!" the horse cried, and he kicked Anastasia right on her bottom. She flew into the air, past the startled baker, and landed in a bin full of eggs. Anastasia spluttered and yelled, covered in gooey yolk, as the baker hurried over to help her. "Are you okay?" But Anastasia ran away crying. She had never been less all right. Oh, no! Out in the market square, things only got worse. Everyone laughed and laughed at the egg-covered Anastasia, who felt terrible. Anastasia ran away as quickly as she could. Cinderella and the birds watched her flee with horror. This wasn't the way that they planned it at all. Cinderella sheepishly put a hand to her mouth. Oops. The birds led Cinderella to a nearby well where Anastasia was not at all pleased to see her. "I saw you in the baker's shop," Cinderella gently said to her stepsister. Anastasia groaned. "He must think I'm... ugh." Anastasia knew that the baker would never give her a second look now. Cinderella disagreed. "You just need a little help, that's all." She had a great idea. "Why don't you come back to the castle? We'll clean you up, and then we'll get you two together." Anastasia thought that was a terrible idea. "But Mother forbids it. She thinks he's beneath me." Cinderella smiled. "And I think she's wrong. The baker's terrific, and you'll never go hungry." Cinderella whisked Anastasia back to the castle so that they could get to work right away. The footmen at the door were rather surprised to see the strange pair. Up in her room, Cinderella wiped the sticky egg off her stepsister's face. There, good as new. But Anastasia wasn't happy yet. "Don't stop now. Mother says that looks count for everything." Cinderella didn't agree. "Of course you want to look your best, but that's not the most important thing." They quickly got down to work. Cinderella knew that less is more, and so she selected a simple dress for Anastasia and put a simple necklace around Anastasia's neck. And when Anastasia admired herself in the mirror, she couldn't believe it was her. Cinderella gave her one last good piece of advice. "Just remember, you'll catch more flies with honey than with vinegar." Anastasia gazed at Cinderella strangely. Who'd want to catch flies? She obviously didn't understand what Cinderella meant. Cinderella patiently explained, "I mean, the best way to impress the baker is just to be nice to him." Anastasia still didn't understand. "How do I do that?" Cinderella showed her. "You could start with a smile." Cinderella pushed Anastasia's lips into something that looked like a smile and assured her, "He'll never be able to resist." Anastasia was pleased. "You think so?" Cinderella certainly hoped so. Anastasia was still worried. "Mother told me never to speak to the baker again." Cinderella took her stepsister's hand. "Maybe it's time to stop following somebody else's orders and start following your heart." Cinderella told Anastasia her plan. "I could walk you to his shop. Meet you in the market at noon tomorrow?" Anastasia was more excited than she'd ever been. "I can hardly wait." But first, Anastasia needed a reason to go to the bakery. She raced all around her mother's kitchen, snatching up all the loaves of bread she could find. and then she fed them to the chickens. When all the bread was gone, Anastasia happily hurried to the carriage, calling, "Mother, I have to run to town. We're out of bread." Meanwhile, in the market square, the baker bought a garland of white orchids from the flower man. Flowers in his hand, he hurried off back to his bakery. And not a minute later, Anastasia bought almost the identical garland. Before Anastasia set off for the bakery, Cinderella reminded her how to smile. Anastasia did her best as Cinderella pushed her forward and promised, "I'll wait for you by the apple cart." But as Anastasia neared the bakery, she saw the baker standing outside his shop and talking to a pretty woman. Anastasia didn't know that the woman was just admiring his flowers. "They're beautiful. She's going to love them," she said. Anastasia's heart was broken. Anastasia felt so badly that she didn't even notice the pretty woman's husband joining her and taking her away. Hurt and upset, Anastasia raced off, tossing her own flowers away. She didn't know that the baker had bought his flowers for her. The baker suddenly saw Anastasia race away and was horrified. He realized what had happened and dashed off after her. He wanted to explain. The baker ran and stopped in an archway to look around. He looked to the left and to the right, but he couldn't find her anywhere. Anastasia was gone. Cinderella and the bluebirds waited by the apple cart to hear Anastasia's happy news. Instead, they saw her run past them, crying her eyes out. Cinderella tried to catch up with her stepsister. What happened? But Anastasia just kept on running. Cinderella tried to follow her, but a carriage charged across the road and got in her way. When it passed, Anastasia was nowhere to be seen. Cinderella was beside herself. "Anastasia? Oh no!" The baker couldn't find Anastasia either, so sad and tired, he slumped on a bench. He was so upset that he didn't even notice that a goat was eating his flowers. The baker heard something and turned with hope in his heart. And there was Anastasia. She cried, "Don't look at me. I look horrible." But the baker didn't think so at all. "Wait, please. Don't run away." He held out the only flower that the greedy goat hadn't eaten. Anastasia took it and smiled, without any help from Cinderella. But suddenly, Drizella and the stepmother pounced upon them. "Anastasia, how dare you defy me? You were forbidden to speak to this man." Drizella scoffed. "Oh, look at her. It's a disaster. We'll be the laughingstock of the entire town." Her mother grabbed Anastasia's arm. "Dear child, you know I only have your best interests at heart. Come along." But Anastasia ripped her arm free. "No, mother, you're wrong." Anastasia stood up to her mother. "He's sweet." The baker swept Anastasia in his arms. "She's wonderful." Anastasia gazed deep into his eyes. "He's romantic." Anastasia looked at her astonished mother and put her foot down. "And we are going to the ball together." Her mother stormed off furiously, dragging Drizella with her. "Drizella, come along." Cinderella watched it all and wiped her forehead with relief. Phew! So Anastasia and the baker went to the ball. Anastasia's hair and silk gown were everything that she had dreamed of, thanks to Cinderella. Anastasia danced with the baker, who looked handsome in his tie and tails. As Cinderella and her prince waltzed beside them, Anastasia whispered to her stepsister, "I'm so happy. I can't believe this. I'm so... Cinderella smiled at her. "I know, me too." And that's where Gus and Jack's story ends. The mice are very proud of the new book they've just done. "Perfect," cries Jack, closing it. "All finished." The fairy godmother smiles at the mice from her chair. "Are you ready to show Cinderella?" Gus and Jack see Cinderella pass by the door and call to the others. "Look, there she is." The mice eagerly scurry after Cinderella to show her what they've done. "Let's go." Jack gleefully tells Cinderella, "It's a book. We made it. Do you like it?" Cinderella is very touched. "I love it. What's it about?" Gus lays back on his pillow and grins. "Duh, it's about all of us." Cinderella can't wait. "How wonderful. I don't suppose you'd want to read this together, would you?" The mice all cheer. They would. Cinderella smiles and starts to read. "Once upon a time,